I'm James Cummings. I'm Ethan Diamond.
I'm Rex Etchison.
I'm Ethan Gilbert.
I'm Ian Eggman. This is our presentation on defeating the two high coverage. So over the last 10 years, and especially in the last 5 years, teams have become less pass heavy and increasingly run heavy. And this is heavily correlated with the fact, or with two high coverages in the NFL becoming more apparent. And with the goal of the explosive plays in the NFL. Particularly teams that struggle against cover 2, cover 4, and man cover 2. And we set out specific game plan design plays to counter the two high. And the data, briefly, we got the play context, coverage and scheme, personnel and alignment, route detail, and outcomes. One thing I want to point out was L1 through L4 and R1 through R4 in the route detail. Specifically, that has to do with the receiver's alignment on the field. L1 being the closest to the sideline, R4 being the closest to the sideline, and then closer than as the number is close.
Moving on to our methodology, so I have 3 steps to this overall process of designing a play. The first part was identifying factors that led to too high, which we did through a binary choice logistic regression. And then we wanted to identify what strategies are successful against that too high coverage when you see too high coverage, which we ran an XG boost to kind of determine how we're going to go about that. Then we also wanted to identify strengths and weaknesses of the 3 teams we were given in the prompt, which we'll explain later. And then the strengths and weaknesses of the Vikings, which is the defense we'll be running our play against. The Bears were beating the Packers were beating the Bears. I do that every time. The Packers were beating the Bears by 7 in the third quarter with 2 minutes and 25 seconds left on a 3rd and 10. The Bears decided to run cover 2. We want to essentially determine, why they ran cover 2, why on that specific situation they chose to run cover 2. The truth is there's kind of a lot of variability in defensive coverage. Obviously, you want to mix it up. But we kind of set out we wanted to determine which factors were the most important. So we ran a binary choice logistic regression with too high as our output variable. That's binary, so it's a 1 if the defense isn't too high, and a 0 if they're not. And then some of the features were down and distance, game script, field position, personnel alignment, and then also a team fixed defense as well. So just moving right into the model results. The estimates are in log odds because it's a binary choice. So we translated them into a percentage effect on the right of each beta coefficient. So for interpretability, for example, on a given 3rd and short, the defense is 54% less likely to run too high in comparison to first down. And then our biggest takeaways for those short yardage situations, teams are much less likely to run too high. And then we also noted the score differential, which you'll see at visual as well. So that first visual is just kind of that down distance. It's, pretty clear trend that as the yardage you need to get for a first down increases, the defense is much more likely to run too high, obviously to eliminate that explosive play.
Now we look at score differential, where positive or negative means that the defense is winning, and positive means the defense is losing. So naturally, it makes sense that the too high frequency is at its highest when the defense is winning. They're trying to keep the ball in front of them, force offenses to work down the field methodically, and vice versa. When they are winning or losing, then they have to be more aggressive, put more of an emphasis on attacking the QB. Now we looked at a league-wide analysis where we looked at frequency first, where the Vikings were by far and away the most frequent team of too high. So they were 11% higher than the league average, and that gave us insight as to why they were chosen as the team to go up against in part 3. And then we looked into defensive EPA, where higher is better. So the Texans and Browns were the top 2 teams in efficiency. However, they were both bottom 5 in frequency. But that just shows that there's not just one right way to play defense. You have to be able to be flexible.
Next, moving on to the next part of the problem was trying to find successful strategies to actually be too high. We started with an XG boost to label the features or what actually goes into beating too high defense, and then moved on to actually identifying the successful strategies. So, the goal here is to optimize attack strategy when it's too high, but we need to do this while maintaining skies. If we're tipping our hand, defenses don't realize that we're running a certain play or doing certain things, they're going to go out of too high, and that's going to nullify our attack strategy. So some things we want to look at to find optimal strategies include personnel, formation, routes, and different route combos that go into that, as well as different target receivers. And like we said, we have to maintain disguise. Offenses are subbing, and then defenses are subbing as a result of those offensive personnel and formations. So that's what they pick up pre-snap, and we want to find groupings of personnel and formation and route concepts that satisfy 2 requirements. We want them to have an above average EPA per play. We still want to see too high at least a league average rate, which is where we don't have teams audibling out. we're gonna compare that back to our league average rate of 31.6%. First, we need to define success in order to do this. So we have two definitions for success. We have a successful play category, which simply is just an EPA greater than 0. We saw this at a 45.8% rate of non-too high coverage and a 47% rate of too high coverage. And then we also have a definition for explosive play, which is defined as a pass that's greater than 20 yards. And intuitively, we're going to see this more when teams are not too high. Too high is actually designed to take away this explosive play. So it makes sense that we're going to see it more in those non-too high sets.
So like Ethan mentioned in our methodology, we ran an XG boost model just to kind of determine what features were the most important in maximizing EPA. And then another caveat, our Y variable for the XG boost model was EPA. So the higher the EPA, the better, obviously. But it was pretty interesting that the targeted receiver came out as the most important feature. So that just kind of led us to thinking that it is important that you're not only designing the right concept, but you're looking to throw to the right guy. And then this just kind of validated our thought process. First we're going to look at that alignment, that formation, then move into the concept, then our first read eventually. And one other thing to note is that the coverage type was the least important. So among cover 4, cover 2, and man cover 2, the difference between those coverages and how to beat them really was not that.
When looking at the personnel that we want to run to attack this two-high defense, we see that one tight end is the most efficient. It was mentioned on the XG boost model, personnel isn't really too important of a variable when considering our game plan to attack it, but it is something that we want to make sure that we get right. So we wanted to make sure that it was efficient, or that it is efficient against too high, and that teams won't audible out of it if they see this personnel. So we see in this graph here, in the scatter plot rather, that you want to be in that upper right quadrant. You want to be efficient against too high and know that teams will actually run too high against it. We see that there are kind of 3 personnels up there. There's 1 running back, 3 tight ends, more run heavy formation, or personnel rather, and 0 running backs, 1 tight end, which is very pass heavy. But we also do see one running back, 1 tight end, i.e. 11 personnel in that green quadrant. So this is the personnel that we're going to run. Also, when you note the dot size, the big dot means that that personnel is ran very frequently against too high. So it's not only is it efficient, it's not runner pass heavy, it's very balanced. We also, it is the most common personnel against too. When looking at formation, kind of same deal. We want an efficient formation, and we want to know that teams won't audible out of it, and they actually will run too high against it. We see that there are 2 formations in that upper right green shaded quadrant, trips and balance. And when noticing the pass rate on the left, we see that there is a higher pass rate for trips, but teams actually run too high more against balance. So when considering our offensive game plan, we will run trips mostly because it is the most efficient formation against too high.
Next, moving on to our route concept creation. We're given individual routes, and we wanted to cluster these routes into different clusters. To kind of figure out how routes are coming together, creating separations for one another, how they're finding space in the defense. And we created these clusters, but we got low silhouette scores, which is going to show like that weak separation between groupings, which makes sense. There's a lot of route concepts that exist in the modern NFL, and a lot of these are very similar. They overlap, they have similar concepts, they hit similar spots in the defense. So these different route concepts don't necessarily form these tight clusters that might be detectable by the data. So what we did was we built off these 10 concepts and we created route concepts that are frequently seen in the modern NFL based off our intuition and information that was informed by the data. So this is an example of one of the concepts that we have. We're given 10 different route types as well as the pre-snap positioning, and we use this to create 20 unique route concepts, like we said, that are commonly seen in the NFL. One of them seen below is the dagger concept, with the R1, the most outside receiver running the cross route, and the R2, the inside receiver running that vertical route, creating space, driving that safety back, and creating space underneath for that cross receiver to get open. Then after looking at those 20 different unique route concepts, we then took a look at EPA per play by concept type, and we started by validating this against the completion percentage. It makes sense that hook heavy is a super high completion percentage. Verts, deep hook, deep out are some of the more lower ones on the end of the spectrum. And we saw a lot of positive plays by EPA per play. Hook heavy being super significant with an average EPA per play of almost 0.45. Verts, drive, which is defined as 2 crossing routes or 2 drag routes in the same play. Dagger, all being pretty significantly positive. But what we do want to figure out is if these are actually significant results. A lot of these are low sample sizes. They might not necessarily be super positive. So we want to run a significance check to see if these are actually significant results or if some of them are just positive, but also have a lot of negative outputs as well. So when we run that significance check using a 95% confidence interval, first we sort to only 50 plus plays, and a lot of these concepts have overlapping confidence intervals. Again, which makes sense. If there was a black and white intuitive answer as to what teams would run all the time, then teams would only be running that concept. So it makes sense that there's not a lot of significant wrap concepts in modern NFL for too high. But two things that we did find to be statistically significant were those hook heavy and drive concepts. Hook heavy, only 63 plays were defined as that in the data set, which we defined as a play with at least 3 or more hooks on the wrap, and drive with 568 plays and being significant, which we found to be very influential for our data. And as we said earlier, a lack of overall significance does kind of suggest the importance of a play calling mix. You see offensive coordinators in the modern NFL switching up concepts a lot, and this is something that we see that's backed by the data.
So we mentioned that drive and hook heavy are our two most efficient concepts against too high. Here's a quick visualization of those two concepts. Hook heavy, as Ethan mentioned, is 3 or more hooks on the play, and then drive is 2 in-cutting routes coming from the same side, whether that's a shallow and a cross and a cross, or a cross and a shallow. Any one of those 3, so these are then visualized right there. When also considering what concept we want to run against too high, we want to make sure that it's also efficient against other coverages if the defense does audible out of too high. And we see here that hook heavy and drive are also, of course, efficient against too high. They're also efficient against other coverages. So if we do see the defense, obviously we're expecting the defense to run too high against these. But if we see the defense audible out, we're confident that these concepts will still be efficient against other coverages. So all in all, as far as our offensive strategy against the too high look goes, personnel isn't as important. But it is something that we wanted to get down, and we're going to be running 11 personnel. It's efficient. It's also the most common personnel against too high. We know the defense won't audible out of their too high look when they see it. We'll be running trips. It's the most efficient. Defense will still run too high against it. And we're going to utilize drive and hook heavy concepts. They're the only 2 significant concepts. And we know that they're going to be efficient, and they're going to get us yards against too high.
So we'll move into part 3 of the prompt, and it has to do with identifying strengths and weaknesses of 3 teams that were provided, and I'll talk more on that later. Identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the Vikings, which is the defense that our offense will go up against. So ultimately design the route concept and game plan for our given scenario. So in the prompt, we got to choose between 3 offensive teams: the Buffalo Bills, New England Patriots, and Kansas City Chiefs. And so we ran models to figure out models. We used our concepts that we ultimately decided on, balance and trips, to figure out which of these 3 teams were best against too high. And we wanted to point out that the Buffalo Bills had the highest EPA in the balanced formation out of any other team of any concept. However, they had a negative EPA in trips. Meanwhile, the Patriots were the only team with a positive EPA in both balanced and trips. This shows that Buffalo could be one-dimensional offense, and we wanted to pick a team that could excel out of multiple formations. So we ultimately decided to go with the New England Patriots, as they also had the highest combined EPA. So now we want to look into the Vikings defense, which is the team that we were going up against as the Patriots. The Vikings are the team that run it the most out of any team in the league. Particularly, they use cover 2 the most. They run at 27.4% of all coverages, followed by cover 4, the third most at 11.1%, and man cover 2 much less frequently at 4.4%. But with that said, when we are designing our play, we're going to have to go up against cover 2 because that is the cover they use the most. And then within cover 2, we looked at their personnel that they use the most, and it was a nickel defense, which is 2 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs at 27.2%, followed closely behind by 3 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, and 4 DBs. And then a lot other personnel is much less frequently. But again, because they run nickel coverage the most, that is the one that we are going to have Patriots go up against when we're running our play.
When evaluating what concept we want to use on this one play, it is the first down and 10 scenario. So we established that drive and hook heavy are the 2 concepts we want to use. We see that drive is 3 times as efficient as hook heavy on first down plays. It also is above average in terms of EPA against too high looks on a first down play, so we will be using the drive concept on this play. Also, when considering explosive rate, as you see with the graph on the right, the more deep routes you have, the more explosive plays you're going to get, which makes sense. There's people running down the field, throws and then can catch it. It's an explosive play. Hook heavy are more obviously kind of shorter intermediate routes, kind of dig and dunk, if you will. Drive with our drive concepts, we do have at least 1 deep route going down the field, as we'll show here in a second. So we will expect to get more yards and more explosive plays from the drive concept. As our XGBoost model noted earlier in the presentation, the most important thing when considering efficiency against a too high look is the receiver that's actually targeted. And so shown on the right here shows the efficiency and how much each route is thrown to in a drive concept against a too high look. So we see that the most efficient route and the route that's actually thrown to the most is the concept inside route. So for example, if it's a shallow going from inside to outside, if it's a shallow and a cross, the shallow is the most efficient. It could be a cross and a cross or a cross and a shallow, like I said before though, but we will be targeting that inside concept route. And also another thing to note is that teams throw the backside route a lot. So we're in trips, the one route on the opposite side of the concept. That's likely because teams get a one-on-one look on that deep route. And they target it, obviously resulting in a lot of yards in those explosive plays.
So moving on to our actual concept in our scenario, which is 1st and 10 as the Patriots from our own 35 against the Vikings. Taking all the knowledge we've acquired throughout this presentation, we're running a drive concept, which is kind of that bread and butter, those two routes in the middle. And then as James said, that crosser is the primary target. And then we also looked at the backside and the trip side that wasn't in the concept. On the highest EPI on those plays was a post on the backside and a vert on the other side. And our kind of logic behind this play and why we think it'll work, we got that post and that vert to kind of clear out the safeties. And then the drive concept to put those linebackers in a bind, hopefully find that window on that crosser or field.
So through this presentation, we've really only talked about going up against two high defenses. However, that's not the only defense we're at in the NFL. So we also wanted to look at how to attack non-too high heavy defenses. So starting with personnel, we saw that no RB and the 2 RB strategy was the most effective. However, the sample size is small, so it is worth noting that we will likely want to change up our personnel groupings often, rather than just playing out of one base personnel. Now moving on to formation, we see that balance and slot are 2 of the most effective formations against non-too high looks. And we also see that trips is not as effective. So while we may use a play in too high, we do have to be adaptable to be able to change depending on what the defense throws at us. Finally, we then looked at some route concepts where we saw that hook heavy and spot, those quick hitted concepts where you get the ball onto your playmakers were the most effective. We're going to look to stay away from concepts like screen, mesh, and isolation. So overall, against non-too high heavy defenses, we're going to really look to switch up our personnel groupings between the no RB and 2 RB strategy, and then also look to play out of both balance and slot, and then look to hit on route concepts like hook heavy and spot.
Moving into our kind of overall takeaways, what we got from this analysis. First, too high is most frequently run in longer situations and scenarios. And the score differential also by that visualization shows that there's a pretty significant effect on when too high is run. And then in terms of our what drives success is the targeted receiver as seen by the XGBoost, which helps to maximize that EPA. And then what we learned about the best concepts against too high, which were the hook heavy and drive against too high, and then we want to run balance and slot formations against not too high. And then some limitations or improvements we could make if we had better data in the prompt. There was a lack of definitive route definition, so at times you could see like a cross route was like a 15-yard dig. Other times we watched a film or a play, it was like a vertical that kind of broke in at the very end. So just like a lack of definition, it would have been nice to have like yards and depth of target where the ball was caught. And there was also no motion or play action data, which obviously those are kind of huge parts of the modern NFL game. Motion and play action are what drives offensive success a lot of times. And then the last thing, there were no running back routes. So obviously a running back can be like the primary read on a play. So without that, it kind of limits our route trees and plays for. And that's it.